here we go with what actually causes mutations and what kind of effect do they have. So we are now going to be starting on this next section that starts with mutations. Okay, so I'm going to go over this part and I'll let you know when we get to these to fill out. So all you have to do is pay attention right now, okay? And I'll tell you when you need to start writing things down. So first of all, what can cause an actual mutation to happen? Okay, so what could cause a piece of a chromosome to change in some way, right? So we have gene mutations, which is a smaller mutation that'll cause a specific protein to change, but then we can also have, remember, our chromosomal mutations, which is a big chunk of that chromosome. So a lot of genes, which is going to affect more proteins. It's going to have a bigger impact. But overall, what can cause these mutations to happen, right? So some of the things that can do that, we can have our physical agents. So physically something happens, right? So excessive heat could cause a mutation, not necessarily in humans, but some other organisms, especially like those single-celled organisms that are floating around in ponds and things. Heat can easily change that. And then we also have things like radiation, right? So that's why their doctors are really careful about how many times you have X-rays and different types of imaging that they might do to check on things happening in your body, because that is radiation. A little bit of radiation is going to be fine. If it's a small change in a chromosome, it's probably going to be fixed in your body and you're going to be fine. But if it's a large amount, it can have a much bigger effect, right? And remember, if that mutation happens in your sperm or your egg cell, then that means that your baby is going to be born with some kind of a problem if that mutation happens. But if that mutation happens in one of your body cells, then you could have a mutation in some type of a protein getting created that's going to be a problem for you in your body that could cause an issue like cancer, right? Can be caused by a mutation, but it's just going to affect you, right? It's not going to be passed on to your child. So that's where the difference is. It depends on where that happens. So for example, for radiation, when in World War II, when the nuclear bomb was dropped on places in Japan, the people who survived were given a lot of radiation from that nuclear bomb. And because of that, a lot of their children had mutations because their sperm and egg cells did get changed by that radiation from that fallout. And then their children were born with birth defects because of that, because of the mutation. Okay, so that's an example. We also have chemical mutations that can happen. There's some different things like pesticides, especially people, excuse me, people are really careful about their pesticides because those are the kind of chemicals that we know can cause some mutations, some changes that could cause some cancers. And then biological agents, right? Viruses and bacteria. Remember, we talked about how they discovered that HPV is a virus that can cause cervical cancer, right? Because it can change, can mutate part of that DNA, which can cause a change in the protein, which can make that cell divide uncontrollably, and then it can become a cancer. So that's another example. So affected chromosomal mutations, basically I've been talking about all the bad things, right? So, because that's usually what happens in animals, and we kind of tend to be egocentric. So we think about how is this going to affect me, right? So most of the time, if it's a whole chromosome change, most of the time it's going to be fatal, meaning that organism is going to get to a point where if there's an extra chromosome or a missing chromosome, it's not going to be able to develop fully because it's not going to be able to make the proteins right. And then that fetus is going to end up stopping its growth at that point. So usually it's bad. However, there are some situations like in plants, extra chromosomes can actually be good. It can actually help them have more, be larger. So they're going to make proteins that are going to increase their size, their sturdiness. If you remember the strawberries that we used, they had 8 sets. So it's like instead of having a pair, they have 8 of each chromosome. So that's why we get those big, big strawberries, right? So those can be good. Okay, so positive mutation, which I just gave you some examples of that. Also, some mutations can cause some like different types of insects might become resistant to a pesticide. They might have a change that makes a pesticide not work on them. And then that could be a positive mutation, right? And then sometimes people even have positive mutations. So we can have some things that might make us not as susceptible to some type of disease. And maybe that change creates a protein that is a little bit different so that it keeps us from getting a disease that otherwise we might have gotten. So that could be positive for people as well. Usually, though, an entire chromosome is not going to be a positive mutation for animals. Only like a gene change would be a positive mutation for animals. But a full chromosome change can be positive for things like plants. Okay, and then negative mutations, which we've been talking about, usually they're fatal. One of the examples is sickle cell anemia. Sickle cell anemia, here's a red blood cell. Here it is. Normally, it has plenty of room to pick up the oxygen it needs to travel around our body. Sickle cell anemia is when it's called sickle cell because a sickle is this type of a shape. It used to be something we used in farming a lot, and a lot of people don't use them anymore, so sickle doesn't make as much sense. But sickle cell is this size, which means it's not able to hold as much oxygen, so that can be a problem for people. And later we're going to learn about it, but it's actually really interesting. The other thing is that sickle shape means that you're less likely to get malaria from mosquitoes. So we found out that actually stayed around in areas where there are a lot of mosquitoes because even though they might not have been able to get as much oxygen, they weren't dying from malaria from the mosquitoes. So it's kind of interesting. And then we have neutral mutations, right? If your eye color gets changed, your eye color doesn't have a big impact on your life, whether you live or die. So that would be considered a neutral mutation. There's a change, but it doesn't affect your chances of living or not. Okay, so now on your packet, we're on our mutations. That's the same as what's up here. So 3 types of agents that can cause mutations. Do you guys remember those that I went over? Remember one I said was something like radiation or heat. Do you remember that one? That was physical, so one would be physical. And the other one we talked about are things like pesticides, chemicals that could cause a change. So the second one would be chemical. And then the third one would be bacteria and viruses. Remember I said we could have something like the HPV virus that could increase chances of cervical cancer. So that would be our third one, bacteria and viruses. And then if an agent can cause cancer, it's called a mutagen. And that is spelled M-U-T-A-G-E-N, mutagen. Okay, let's look at the next one. So 3 birds all have the same type of unusual mutation that causes them to have different traits. So we're going to look at each one of these birds and something is different about each one of them. And then we're going to figure out, is this a negative test or a positive test or a neutral, not test. Boy, I'm saying the word test. Mutation. Negative mutation, positive or neutral. So let's look at what this would be. This little birdie here has smaller wings. Do you think it would be positive, meaning it would be a good thing if it had smaller wings? Do you think it'd be a negative, it would be bad if it had smaller wings? Or do you think it would be neutral, meaning it wouldn't make it any difference? So go ahead and write down which one you think that is. Okay, then the next one, the feather color changes from green to blue. Green to blue. Would that be a positive? Would it be a negative effect? Or would it be neutral? It wouldn't really matter. It wouldn't affect this bird's chance of survival. And then the third one, a sharper beak. So do you think a sharper beak would be a positive or a negative, or do you think it wouldn't really matter? Write down what you think for that one. Okay, so we're going to go over these, and honestly, you could probably argue either way for a lot of these, right? Because we don't necessarily know the habitat the bird lives in. So there could be some reasons. Some might be more positive or negative or neutral depending on the environment. So we kind of have to justify it. That's why we have the justify your answers part, right? So this first one with smaller wings, we would probably say it's negative because it's more likely that smaller wings means it wouldn't be able to fly as well. So that would probably be a negative. I could think of scenarios maybe where it's a flightless bird and maybe having smaller wings would mean it could move and get around more easily. So that could be a positive. Or it's flightless, so it's neutral because it doesn't matter. But probably the best guess would be negative on that one. And then on the second one, feather color, green to blue. Again, we don't know where it's living, right? So most likely just a color change would be more of a neutral mutation. However, if it's green and it lives directly, it's a small little bird that lives right in leaves and it turns to blue and it makes it really easy to see and there's a larger bird that eats it, it could be a negative, right? You could come up with a reason why it could be a negative, although in most cases it would probably be a neutral. And then the last one is sharper beak. So that one probably we'd say is a positive. A sharper beak, it's probably more easily able to get to its food or even protect itself if it needs to. So it's probably a positive. Again, if it needs to eat really wide seeds and needs to have a wide beak and it's sharper, that might be a negative for it. So we can, again, maybe come up with a reason it might be a negative mutation, but it's probably most likely to be a positive mutation. Okay, makes sense? Okay, you guys still listening to me? You guys having other conversations and not following along? Okay, we're almost done. So now you guys get to do something fun. Are you ready to do something fun? Okay, so kind of like what you did with your monsters, you guys are going to be creating your own mutated animal. Okay, and I want you guys to make them cute, hang them up. So that's the next paper you guys should have. Which should look something like this. So that's this guy right here. Okay, so you can pick any animal and it can be fictional. So you can make it any cool thing you want to make it, right? And then I want you to go ahead and come up with what would be a positive mutation, a neutral mutation, and a negative mutation. So explain different mutation options for it. Okay, and then you can either draw your animal with one of the mutations, or you could draw your animal in 3 different ways showing each one of the mutations, or you could put all 3 mutations together and put it all onto one animal, however you guys want to do it. Okay, so use your boxes with your materials in them, make them look really pretty, make sure that you have an explanation. Don't just say sharp beak for positive. You need to explain why it's positive, okay? So make sure you have that full explanation on there, and then you guys are going to be hanging these up. Got it? That's what you have to do for the rest of the day. Can't wait to see them when I get back. Everybody have an awesome, awesome rest of your day.